Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 6, 2018. I guess we better hurry up and get the show in here before everything changes and maybe Sam Nunberg shows up on the air somewhere, maybe here. I don't think he has our Skype address, but you never know. And he may call on the telephone in the background. That's always a possibility. I think his media tour is done, and I think we ended up about where we were supposed to end up yesterday. That is with Sam Nunberg realizing and acknowledging publicly, oh yeah, I think I really do have to cooperate with the Mueller probe after all, which leads me to wonder just what he was doing the whole day. I really have no idea. And it might not be worth reviewing it all that closely. I don't know, but we may have to, just by way of giving background to what we're going to do today, because I'm reading Bill's tweet for the morning. Daily Co's Radio is live now, and it's so much more relevant when I read it right at the beginning. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Hi, I'm your host today. I'll be going all Nunberg on America's ass. Bill says he hears that's the in thing these days. It was in yesterday. Nobody threw him off the air, I noticed. Everybody wanted him. And he was, doing all kinds of shows. He was calling everywhere. I figured he would show up by the end of the day on Joe Franklin's show. Then I looked it up. Joe Franklin's dead, so he's not going to do that. But I had to look that up. That's true. But somehow he would have liked that, I think. And I don't know, he was on a rampage yesterday, but by the end of the day, he was saying, yeah, I think I've been convinced. I don't know. I feel, it's funny, I feel like people shouldn't have spent time on the air convincing him that he ought to testify, because then he wouldn't, and he'd go to jail, and that would be kind of interesting. But I think by the end of the night, everybody was sort of convinced that he was having some sort of mental breakdown, and then it got a little bit less funny, and we began to worry, somebody's health could be falling apart here on television, and I don't feel that bad about it, to be honest. He's kind of a wacko to begin with, and he's got an on-again, off-again relationship with Trump, and I guess we were all overlooking yesterday. He spent a good deal of his time on the air insisting, I don't care about Donald Trump, I wanted him to lose. By the end of, he was fired from the campaign very early on, and then he sort of tried to get his way back in, kind of, I don't really know. Donald Trump certainly ran around making plenty of claims, his usual claim. Oh, he's calling all the time, begging for his job back. And you can never, I was going to say you can never tell whether he's really doing that or not, but you can tell he is not. If Donald Trump says he's calling and begging to get his job back, he's not doing that. But that's about all you can do in terms of figuring what he was all about yesterday. Michael Musson pointing out what many people did claim yesterday, that Sam Nunberg did a good job distracting from something. In his case, I guess what we're really hearing from Michael is that he thinks that the New Yorker article from, was Jane Meyer wrote the article, very well done, as I understand it. I haven't read it yet. Maybe we can spend some time doing that. But lots of praise and lots of hidden nuggets in it. I probably saw more people tweet, oh, here's something overlooked from the New Yorker article, than I did simply seeing people say, hey, it's a good article and you should read it and what a great job. And the headline says it all. I don't know what the headline was. But let's see. What's your bit here, Michael? Sam Nunberg did a good job distracting from the New Yorker article claiming Putin vetoed Romney as Secretary of State. That would be an interesting claim. Maybe we should read this thing. Jane Meyer is always worth it, but it usually takes an entire show and a half to get through any Jane Meyer piece. They're that heavy. So it's time well spent, certainly. The whole thing kicked off, I guess, with an interview with Katie Tur on MSNBC, and he was back on MSNBC by the end of the evening. I think Ari Melber had him on, and it was there that they spent like 30 minutes trying to convince him no, you can't just say you're not going to comply with a grand jury subpoena because you don't want to, or you're afraid that your testimony will incriminate someone who you're friends with. That's not really an answer to a subpoena. Of course, if you think that there's something that they're going to uncover that is purely personal and has no probative value for the investigation, you can try to go to court and make that claim. And Sam Nunberg, by some accounts, by which I mean all accounts, is a lawyer. Well, I mean, he's a member, or allegedly a member in good standing of the New York bar, which doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're doing or ever did. But, you weren't expecting him to be saying he was just simply not going to comply, because I think one of his excuses for not complying with the subpoena was it was too broad, which is a thing you can say and you can go and make arguments. But he was upset, for instance, that they want all my communications with Roger Stone, and I communicate with Roger Stone. I email with him 15 times a day. That's why they want your emails. And he says, well, so that's too many things. I'm not going to just go and give them all that. Besides, what right have they got to ask me what I've been talking to Roger Stone about? The answer is they have a subpoena. That's the difference between somebody being a busybody and you're being allowed to say you have no business asking me that, and a federal grand jury saying you really need to tell us that. But the whole thing kicked off, I guess, in the interview with Katie Tur. It is featured as Tegan Goddard's Political Wire exchange of the day, as a matter of fact. Tur asking him, so do you think they have something on the president? And Nunberg saying, I think they may. I think that he may have done something during the election. Well, I think so too. So you and I are on the same page there. And from there, of course, it was just another couple hours of meltdown, and it only got worse for him until finally he's answering questions on TV. Are you going to comply with the subpoena? No, I'm not. What are they going to do to me? Well, they could hold you in contempt of court. They could put you in jail. They're not going to put me in jail. Well, they might. I mean, that's what they can do. If they subpoena you and you simply refuse to comply, that's probably what they'll threaten you with. And he seemed pretty certain that wasn't going to happen. And then by the end of the day, I think he called in somewhere and said, I'm at dinner with my friends and family, and I'll probably end up cooperating in the end. Well, I think that's a wise path if I'm your lawyer, which I'm not, though I did pretend to be yesterday. And joking around, and I very much enjoyed, until somebody said he might be having a mental breakdown, the idea of him essentially, well, I had climbing the Empire State Building, angrily demanding that C-3PO turn the trash compactors on in the detention center, whatever, all kinds of obviously crazy things. And in fact, I did see somebody refer to Nunberg because he's kind of a bit player in Trump world. And that's what, one thing that was sort of lost in all this was, one, he's a bit player, and two, he ended up, having been fired from the Trump campaign, being kind of anti-Trump, even if it was just superficial. So it's not exactly the same thing as finding a Trump insider saying, yeah, I think he did something during the campaign. He wants people, or he, at some point in his career, wanted people to think that Donald Trump was doing something, which is fine, because I want to think that too, and I'm okay with listening to it. But here, Raw Story, for instance, has this quote. Travis Getty's got this story. GOP strategist Steve Schmidt saying, Sam Nunberg is just another low-life Trump character from the Star Wars cantina. That's our segue then, Star Wars. Republican strategist Steve Schmidt said Sam Nunberg's on-air meltdown represented a new low in the Trump presidency, if you can blame Trump for anyone who ever worked for him in the past. And I don't see why not. President Donald Trump promised to hire the best people, but Schmidt said his administration has instead been populated with a wretched hive of scum and villainy like the Mos Eisley Cantina in Star Wars. And I especially appreciate that because I use the Mos Eisley metaphor all the time. I'm usually talking about Trump Tower, but it could very easily apply to the Trump campaign, which was, of course, based in Trump Tower, and for good reason. Two good reasons. One, it was already full of scum and villainy, and 2, Jabba the Hutt lived there already, and he only had to take the elevator to work, and that's kind of, Jabba the President's speed. You know what I'm saying? We've been having this discussion for the last year, which is how low can you go? Schmidt told MSNBC's Morning Joe. How low can I go? I could quote what happened on Morning Joe. That's the end of that story. Each week, we find a new way to hit a new low, or we find a way to hit a new low. A new way is fine there. Use that 2 times there. Sam Nunberg, what we saw yesterday is this Star Wars cantina bar scene. These characters melting down on national TV every 24 or 36 hours. Yeah, about that Star Wars cantina thing. I didn't understand why that music, I thought, wasn't alien enough. But it's very interesting that a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, they played that sort of 1920s flapper jazz. I thought that was an interesting musical selection. Anyway, and I've never really been able to reconcile that, but I'm not certain what kind of music those guys would be into anyway. Yeah, sometimes people surprise you with their musical selections. Anyway, he said the televised spectacles masked a genuine national security scandal engulfing the Trump presidency. I'm afraid I'm inclined to agree there. The United States has been attacked in a new type of war, an information war, a cyber war. I love cyber. It's so scary sounding. And the President of the United States and his retainers, his loyalists around him, they refuse to defend the country, Schmidt said. That's true. They give, in fact, aid and comfort to our enemies and adhere to them in time of war. And, that's like actual treason, but never mind that. They don't defend America's election process. True, you would have seen yesterday, even without our mentioning it explicitly on air, the story of, $120 million or so appropriated, I believe, to the State Department. Is that right? I don't know why that would have been appropriated to the State Department. But I kept seeing Rex Tillerson's photo with there it is. In fact, it's mentioned right down here. Why don't we just continue with the article? Basically, all questions are answered by articles that have already been written. I'm just too impatient to get to them, and my mind wanders in the middle. And that's what makes it fun to read the news with me. That way, now, I don't know whether that's fun for you, but it's fun for me. It feels like I'm having a conversation with someone else. I think there's probably a medical treatment for that, but I would be very lonely if I took those pharmaceuticals and just had to sit there and read articles for myself. How boring would that be, right? This way I pretend it's what this radio show is all about, is to keep me off the antipsychotic drugs. This way I'm just not talking to myself. There's people on the other end of this thing. 170 of them right now, and untold millions downloading it later. This would have been a great excuse. You would have gotten yourself committed. 10 years ago, you could say that. No, that's just impossible, and we're going to have to put you in. Now podcasting, who knows what could be, right? This is why they can't put Donald Trump away, right? I'm the president of the United States. This goofball thinks he's the president. Like the madness of King George, you can't do anything about it. He is president. It's not my fault, but he is. All right. Well, where were we? Donald Trump and his apologists constantly are attacking these essential institutions that are necessary for the security of the country. It's a remarkable moment in the history of the country. It is remarkable. That's why we have your remarks here enclosed in quotation marks. Thank you. What a brilliant insight. It's a remarkable moment. It's because on television you're not allowed to say it's effing bananas. But, well, you could say that, and that'd be quotable if you just said it that way. Host Joe Scarborough, who nobody cares about, pointed out that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had not used $120 million budgeted for his department to counter foreign election interference, which Schmidt found baffling. And apparently everybody in America found it baffling. Very widely shared piece of news. I am not certain why anybody thought that the State Department was the right place to park $120 million to counter foreign election interference, to be honest. And probably the worst selection possible, given, that Rex Everything Tillerson, is head of the State Department. He's the biggest Putin apologist, I think, that we've got, and that includes Donald Trump. I mean, he came into it better friends, I think, with Putin than Donald Trump is, but Trump's dumber. I mean, I have to give him that. He wins in that contest, but only by a little. The president of the United States won't acknowledge the attack. Nobody in the administration will criticize the Russians. It's extraordinary, Schmidt said. We woke up Monday. The president of the United States, his focus is attacking Canada and Mexico, not the Russians who are attacking our election process. Our democracy is sustained by two things, right? I think probably more than that, but okay. A free election process, which has been undermined by the Russians, but also the rule of law, which, can I be honest with you for a minute, has been undermined by the Republicans. I just think I knew you would ignore that, Steve, because you're a Republican, but that's really been on you for the most part. But okay, there are certainly Democrats that you could pin some part of the distancing of America from the rule of law on and be accurate about it. But I would say in particular, these particular parts of it, and in particular, the attacks on our elections system as part of our rule of law. That's really you. What is this? Here we have this. This is interesting. This is incorrectly punctuated here. Just an editing note. We have this Fruit Loops conspiracy theory nutcase group of Republicans and right-wing media that are constantly attacking the rule of law in this country, our most vital institutions to protect the security of the country, on a range of conspiracy theories, he said. We've never seen anything like this in this country. We have, and it's been years, and you're right to point out, it is, in fact, nutcase Republicans and right-wing media. In the last 10 years, it's been particularly pronounced, but it's always been there. You've just succeeded usually in suppressing it as fringy, but in the last decade or so, you have moved that wing to the forefront, and I'm sure it's been over your objection. But I mean, you've exploited it and used it pretty extensively. And those of us who remember living under the George W. Bush administration, where you were with us or against us, and if you were worried about what they were doing either in Iraq or with detainees or here in America spying on Quaker peace groups and what have you, you were objectively pro-Saddam. I remember that very well, and you were there. But I think you know that. By the way, the bad punctuation was, if I read it as punctuated, it said, we have this fruit, loops conspiracy theory, nutcase group of Republicans. Now, the second comma I think is okay, but I've never seen a comma between fruit and loops before. But, whatever. That's innovative, I guess. Okay, well, that's the end of that particular story. I just thought that was interesting. It's always nice to hear that kind of criticism from a Republican, because I can, just the reverse of what has been going on for so long in traditional media. Even Democrat so-and-so, even the liberal Joe Lieberman says, blah, blah, blah. Well, now we can point to Republicans on the same footing here. Let's see. Karen has a comment here. Karen D says, found Melber's Nunberg interview totally cringeworthy. Why are we cringing? It was fascinating TV, but the therapy session / legal advice mix was too much. I see what you mean. I think so too. I didn't watch, I didn't watch anything. I never watch any of this stuff. And I couldn't decide what to cringe at first. Yeah, the fact that he was on, or the fact that they were actually seemed like they were trying to help him. And it was like, I don't know, I think you should sell him rope at that point. But then again, you're hanging a non-Trump person, and I don't know how helpful that really is. Michael's got another comment here for us. Let's see. It is confusing about the $120 million for the State Department. The State Department, or the appropriation was to the Department of Defense on behalf of the state. How? And then Tillerson didn't ask for it until the last days of the fiscal year, too late for defense. Supposedly, state forfeited $60 million but could still get $40 million. That is confusing. We'll have to dig up some information on that. Perhaps we can make use of one of our breaks to find more info on that. It's procedurally sounds pretty interesting. Let's see. Another armed teacher story popping up on my screen here that might be of some interest. Let's just check in on this. I'm worried about what this might be about. Let's see. Who are we reading here? I'm going to have to open up our other Twitter feed here so we can get our Twitter bios up here. Kelly Wickham Hurst, who identifies here as a verified account, executive director, Being Black at School, a speaker, activist, and educator. And great, okay, beingblackAtschool.org. I can see the need for such an organization, though I am not familiar with it. But let's see what she got here. An armed white teacher fired his gun in a classroom. Are we talking about the Georgia guy here? Now, are we finally catching up and getting photos of this person? I don't know how, it's not like I've been waiting all day for photos. Okay, and this is an old tweet, so it's from March 1st. We have both a gun problem and a white male problem, y'all. We got to deal with both issues here, and it's LA Times article. Yeah, so we're talking about the Georgia school teacher who fired his gun. I never did really get, I didn't stick with the story long enough to try and figure out exactly why he did this, and it seems like he was having sort of a personal flip-out moment, which is, if the guy's got a gun and he fires it in school, I don't know if I care at that moment. Well, it's not that he is a school shooter in the classic sense. He's a school shooter in the personal flip out sense. Well, don't they all sort of personally flip out at some level? He may have had no designs on mass shooting, but if you're armed and you're in school and you're flipped out, that's a problem. Anyway, I don't think we ever figured out exactly what was triggering that guy. See, I guess probably the wrong word for it. But now we have a name on him, and it's sort of interesting how it's being presented here in the LA Times. If I may indulge the story just for a little bit and read you the lead on this. After their teacher fires a gun at school, Georgia students use opportunity to challenge Trump's proposal. Very wise and quite correct in terms of, what do you do with this situation? Oh, Matt Pearce is the writer of this piece, someone I see frequently on Twitter. Jesse Randall Davidson, I guess is the name of the teacher, wasn't a stranger, wasn't some mysterious threat from the outside. He was a bearded, bespectacled 53-year-old social studies teacher and the play-by-play announcer for the football games at Dalton High School in northwest Georgia. But when the teacher brought a gun to school, barricaded himself in his classroom Wednesday, and fired a single shot, students quickly recognized that this wasn't just a sad local incident. Amid national outrage over school shootings and suggestions by President Trump that schools would be safer if some teachers packed guns, it was a political event. Quite true. And don't worry about politicizing that one, kids. Go right ahead. My favorite teacher at Dalton High School just blockaded his door and proceeded to shoot a 16-year-old student named Chandi Chastain. Tweeted at the National Rifle Association, earning more than 17,000 retweets. We had to run out the back of the school in the rain. Much worse, in the rain, of course. Students were being trampled and screaming, "I dare you to tell me arming teachers will make us safe." Well, they will tell you that. I don't think they'll decline the dare, but they will say, well, we're going to screen them, you see. We're gonna have rigorous, what we might say, extreme vetting for them. I will say this administration is probably the last one you want to trust on extreme vetting for anybody. But it did make the excellent point that you are unlikely to be able to prevent everyone who's either unstable at the time, or how will you know when somebody is potentially going to become unstable? But yeah, you're going to be arming some people that you're taking some serious risks with. Now, we do that now with police, and the results are not stellar, I must say. I think you probably know that already, and that's an incredible understatement. But mistakes will be made. And I guess the question is, do you want to be responsible for making those mistakes is one question. And another is, will you make that mistake more frequently than mass shooters otherwise motivated from the outside or inside show up on their own, organically, as we might say, rather than actually creating incidents, not to mention the mistakes and accidents along the way. And I guess another thing we ought to consider here, though I don't know if I put the story aside or not, because we've just seen it too many times as it is. But that is a story in itself here. Let's switch gears slightly. I don't know whether I put a story on this aside or not, but the other day we heard what I think is the third story from this year, this new year. Though some of these may stretch back into late last year, of high school teachers, some at private schools, some at public schools, sort of being ferreted out as and outed as white supremacists. Teachers by day, white supremacists by night. The latest one turned up in Florida, and although I'm certain we would find many more examples of teachers who are just racists, just sort of in general, and hide it well enough, I guess, to get hired by public schools, but then accidentally let something slip later on. We're talking instead about people who are actively living double lives, pretending to be mild-mannered social studies teachers or what have you during the day, but running white supremacist websites and producing white supremacist podcasts by night. And this is the third one of these teachers we've turned up, and this last one being in Florida, you have to wonder, are we going to spend public money arming one of these people and sending them into the schools only to find out too late that they were, in fact, a virulent Nazi? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Hello, and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And when we left off, cliffhanger, as we left off during or before our first break, I mentioned to you that this is, I thought, the third story that I had seen of teachers being outed as active public, well, somewhat semi-public white supremacists. And in fact, Jamel Bowie had tweeted something over the weekend, I think, that I retweeted, and I noted that this was the third one there. So I found my tweet on it. He had commented on the latest story from Florida that this was a reminder that white supremacists exist in ordinary life where they can do real damage. A very true and appropriate observation. Attaching the Huffington Post story on it, exclusive, Florida public school teacher has a white nationalist podcast. We can go through the story. I mean, I think you're up to speed on it, probably. You've heard the news on this one. I will go and disarm the auto-playing video that Huffington Post embeds in almost everything. What have we got here? Yes. Diana Volatich? Is that, that's the name of the podcast name that she was using, I think. Unless that's, I can't tell which one's which. I know, I think she had an even more Russian name to do her podcast with. But here's an update. I will start with the update, because that's what happens when you put your update at the top of the page here. Diana Volatich suggests this is the subheader, Muslims should be eradicated from the earth. That does sound white supremacist, doesn't it? Believes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and teaches middle school social studies. So, that could be pretty damaging, which was Jamel's point. The update On March 4th, Diana Volitich, it's Volitich, has been, quote, removed from the classroom, Citrus County School District Superintendent Sandra Himmel announced Sunday in a statement. The body of the story begins this way. On Friday, March 2nd, 2018, the Citrus County School District was made aware by a HuffPost reporter of a concerning podcast, Himmel said in a statement. The Human Resources Department was notified and an investigation was initiated immediately. The teacher has been removed from the classroom and the investigation is ongoing. I actually think that's part of the update, not the main body. There we are. The previously, it says here. That would be the main body coming up. The reporters on this story, by the way, Christopher Matthias, Jenna Amatuli, and Rebecca Klein. I don't know if any of or all of those three were involved in notifying or finding out about this podcaster and then notifying the Citrus County School District. But kudos to them for their story, even if it wasn't them. Let's see. What have we got here? The piece is illustrated by a photo, I guess. What are we looking at here? The profile photo for the now deleted Twitter account, Tiana Dalichov. That was the much more Russian-sounding name. It's interesting how these white supremacists love the Russian-sounding names these days. There's a whole weird psychology behind it, as you know. And then, by comparison, the photo of Diana Volitich as a staff member on the Crystal River Middle School, as displayed on their website, and it's quite obviously the same person. And in fact, they are wearing the same earrings, interestingly enough, in their photos. But it's interesting, even that this as a white supremacist podcaster, you would even bother to put a photo of yourself on display in a way that would identify you quite clearly to anyone looking. And you'd have to be something of a sleuth to figure that out. I don't know why ordinarily people from Crystal River Middle School would be on the website of a white supremacist podcast, but it could happen. I mean, it's a pretty white place to be, and, anything could happen these days. All right, here's the previous to the update original story from HuffPost. Diana Volitich, a 25-year-old social studies teacher at Crystal River Middle School in Florida. 25 years old. You got to stop with the avocado toast so that you can have enough money for school books or reading enough history to understand that, the Nazis were, on the other side. And also, by the way, not particularly good to Russians back in World War II, but whatever. Those were the communist Russians. I'm sure they would have gotten along just fine with the fascist Russians, right? I don't think they really distinguished. But anyway, yes. So Diana apparently has been secretly hosting the white nationalist podcast Unapologetic. That would be the title of the podcast, under the pseudonym Tiana Dalichov. And it's not a very good pseudonym either. Her name is Diana and her podcast name is Tiana. So that's not good. Volitich becomes Dalichov, which, not a huge departure. Anyway, she's been hosting this thing and bragging, by the way, about teaching her views, that is white supremacy, in public school. Huffington Post, or rather HuffPost, has discovered. In her most recent podcast on February 26th, a guest railed against diversity in schools, dismissing the idea that, quote, a kid from Nigeria and a kid who came from Sweden are supposed to learn exactly the same and have the same IQ. It's sort of a vague racist statement. I mean, it's very explicitly racist in its content. It's just vague, like, what do you mean? A kid from Nigeria and a kid from Sweden. First of all, who puts the two of them in the same classroom? Anyway, I mean, it's not like you're speaking from experience. But even if you were, I don't really know exactly what you are. I want you to state why don't you just state your racism more explicitly than that? A kid from Nigeria and a kid from Sweden are supposed to learn exactly the same? Well, everybody's got different learning styles. We know that. Some people are N's and some are S's. And by the way, there are some, I forgot that there was some vociferous pushback on the pushback on Myers-Briggs that's out there too. And I'll have to bring that up at some point during the week. But okay, they don't have the same IQ either. What if I'm saying that the kid from Nigeria is 100 times smarter than the kid from Sweden? Am I not racist now? No, you probably are, but in a different way. Okay. Anyway, that's almost certainly not the point of the guest on this white supremacist, white nationalist podcast. Volich enthusiastically agreed with the guest and went on to argue that science has proven that certain races are smarter than others. In the same episode, Volich boasted about bringing her white nationalist beliefs into the classroom and hiding her ideology from administrators. She said that when parents complained to the school's principal about how she's injecting political bias into the classroom, Volitich lied to the principal and said it was not true. She believed me and backed off, she said. An important admission, I think, by the way, because this is probably happening anywhere that white nationalists are teaching in the classroom. I'm sure that when complaints are made, they deny that it's happening, and that the case of first impression, or at least the first pass at these things, is usually the teacher denying it and the administrators backing off because, I don't know. I mean, they're probably in disbelief at the whole thing. Volitich also agreed with her guest's assertion that more white supremacists need to infiltrate public schools and become teachers. I imagine she would agree with that. They don't have to be vocal about their views, but get in there, her guest said. Be more covert and just start taking over these places. Right, Volitich said. I'm absolutely one of them. Why you would have that podcast? I mean, I guess she's just daring them to fire. She's clearly got some agenda beyond, well, I'm a white supremacist and I want to put, food on the table. It's kind of like, well, this is the risk I'm willing to take. I want to have this confrontation. And I guess at 25, you could probably still afford to do that. After HuffPost made inquiries about Volitich's white nationalism to the Citrus County schools on Friday, Tiana Dalichov tweeted that, quote, she might disappear for a while and then set her account to private. She also scrubbed the website for her podcast. I don't know why that's a part of the plan to duck everything. I thought you should be out and open and unapologetic. But, wow, she's a hypocrite instead. Who would have guessed? HuffPost took screenshots of many of the racist and incendiary statements that she made online. Here's a couple examples. Let's see. Anything particularly egregious? I don't know. I mean, it's all sort of garbage posting, I guess, as you might expect. Let's see. It isn't supremacist or hateful to prefer your own people over others. America's education system is designed to enable victimization when teachers are forced to learn about institutional racism and prove it's real when it isn't. I literally feel brain cells dying as I read this BS. That's good. I'm pleased to know that your brain cells are dying. I enjoy that. White privilege? Prove to me that it exists. Show me statistics that prove whites benefit economically solely because of their race. So she's actually more of a alt-right braggart bro than white nationalist, according to the Post. I mean, she's probably a white nationalist, and that's probably the case behind every white nationalist or closeted white nationalist boasting alt-right bro. So I guess that's revealing in that sense. What does having compassion do with the fact that systemic racism and white privilege aren't real? She asks in response to someone's tweet that says it is. Let's see. Also, HuffPost says they downloaded the episode of this week's podcast, which you can listen to here. Start at 1:30 in, I guess, for the aforementioned comments. It's a lengthy podcast. It's really not. At least this segment of it here. I don't know whether it's any longer than this or this is just part of it. This is like a 17-minute deal. What a wimp. Do 2 hours, I say. The school where Volitich works is overwhelmingly white. In the 2015-2016 school year, nearly 90% of the school's students identified as white, per the National Center for Education Statistics. Only about 4% of the students identify as black, 3% as Hispanic. Most of the school's students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. Well, she's planted herself in the right place for white nationalism and Trumpism. 90% white, but most of the school students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So I guess you're talking about some lower income whites as well. I mean, everybody, basically. It sounds like, she parked herself in the right place. I was going to say she didn't challenge herself all that greatly. If she's in a 90% white school district, she might have to be more explicit in her racism in order to stand out. Scott Hebert, or perhaps Hebert, if he's Cajun, Executive Director of Educational Services for the Citrus County School District, could not confirm that Dalichov was Volatich, but said the district will be looking into the statement she made, checking the validity to see if they violate our code of ethics and policy. I would think so. She does not speak on behalf of the Citrus County School District, Hebert said. The views she's listed online are not really in line with how our district operates. I think you could probably be stronger about that one. Tiana Dalichov didn't respond to HuffPost's request for comment on Facebook and Twitter on Friday. She's since deleted those social media accounts. Volatich did not respond to HuffPost's message to her school email address on Friday either. Earlier this week, the blog Angry White Men, which tracks white nationalism, wrote a post about how someone named Tiana Dalichov had interviewed the prominent white supremacist media figure Lana Loktev, whose name I've seen before, and I don't think we've actually had to mention her on the air up until now. But she interviewed her on this week's episode of Unapologetic. Loktev works for the media outfit Red Ice TV, which the Southern Poverty Law Center recently designated as a hate group. In the episode, Tiana Dalichov talked openly about being a public school teacher, but didn't reveal her real name or the school where she worked because she's so unapologetic. HuffPost found a website promoting the writing of Tiana Dalichov that had a bio section listing the author's home as Crystal River, Florida. Volatich is listed in public records as residing in Crystal River. She is also listed as being 25 years old. This year, when a fan tweeted at Tiana Dalichov asking how old she is, she responded that she was 25. So all the sleuth work coming out here. I always appreciate hearing about how they make this discovery and reach this conclusion. On an episode of her podcast, she mentioned that last school year was her first year in the district where she works. Citrus County School District confirmed that HuffPost that Volatich started teaching in the district in August of 2016. Volatich's photo on the Crystal River Middle School website and social media profile photos of Tiana Dalichov appear to feature the same person. It's really not even a question. The photos show Volatich and Dalichov wearing the same set of earrings, as a matter of fact. As pointed out right in here, seen at the top of the piece. Lastly, the names Tiana Dalichov and Diana Volatich share all but two of the same letters and the same number of syllables. That's really not very telling, but it is interesting. In her podcast appearances and social media posts, Volatich talks regularly about being a teacher, even mentioning she teaches in Florida, and makes statements that are deeply alarming, particularly for someone tasked with shaping the minds of middle school students. On this week's podcast, Volatich said that when students ask her questions about current events, she responds with unbiased, quote, facts. But as Tiana Dalichov, Volatich has suggested facts such as that terrorism will continue unless Muslims are eradicated from the face of the earth. The quote, in fact, being, the sects all follow the same holy text. That was my point. Until they reform the holy text to condemn the act of killing the infidel, or until we eradicate them from the face of the earth, the attacks will continue. More embedded tweets, basically this time leveling attacks at Islam, broadly stated. She has gushed about the work of anti-Semitic author Kevin MacDonald and has said the JQ is incredibly complex. Important to keep up with the terminology these days. JQ stands for the Jewish question, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jewish people have undue influence over the media, banking, and politics that must somehow be addressed. Somehow usually being, the Holocaust, mass murder, eradication of Jews from the face of the earth, along with Muslims, I guess. How interesting is that? Of course, a tweet here from Tiana Dalichov embedded in here. Currently reading, with a picture of The Culture of Critique is the name of the book by Kevin MacDonald, illustrated with a picture that appears to be the silhouettes of many Hasidic Jewish men in their hats. Doing what? I don't know. And it's a very weird thing here. The picture, I guess she took the picture of herself holding it because her thumb is in the photo here. And she says, currently reading this, and it says, only a few pages in, and my mind is already blown. Which, if you're already a white nationalist, reading an anti-Semitic tract, I would think would probably not blow your mind in the first couple of pages. You'd be like, this is pretty true. I generally agree with this. But, I don't know. I don't know where she's coming from. Anyway, let's see. The story continues here, and I'm going to read to the end, I hope, because there's also discussion of other teachers who have been similarly outed, I think, right here in this article, as I recall. She has repeatedly praised, defended, and retweeted neo-Nazis and white supremacists, including David Duke, Arthur Jones, unfamiliar to me, Patrick Casey, same, Mark Collette, same, and Mike Pinovich, a.k.a. Mike Enoch, who I feel like maybe we have mentioned his name once in the past. I don't know who any of these guys are, and I'm kind of glad about that, but we all, need to hear their names once in a while so that when they come up later, we'll be aware. Here is a photo, is a embedded, looks like maybe a Facebook post from Mark Collette. Well, maybe it's a tweet. I don't know. Yeah, using the ad. With a picture of David Duke surrounded by a couple of other guys. And I guess this is the new thing for white supremacist dudes to do. They lift weights and then flex their muscles and show how strong they are or something, and we're supposed to then get, I don't know what, worried about weirdo white supremacists. And also an interesting thing going on here. They have hidden the identities of the three people in there flexing their muscles with David Duke with photoshopped cartoon heads of, white guys with, I don't know whether that's supposed to be like their hair on there or what. It's a very strange blonde hairdo there. But I guess that's supposed to keep them anonymous. And it's sort of a cartoon in the style of the Pepe the Frog or the other weird cartoon faces that the 4chan crowd used to be fans of using. And I guess once you see that, you will recognize it if it crops up elsewhere in your everyday online life. Anyway, here's the section I was looking for. Many white supremacists across America today lead double lives, advocating loudly and anonymously for white supremacy and fascism online while holding down respectable jobs and doing their best to keep their online lives hidden. But over the past year, some of them have been exposed. In June, okay, goes back a year, to find the example of the principal of a charter school in New Orleans, fired from his job after videos surfaced that showed him wearing rings associated with white nationalism. Just don't wear the rings, dude. He had similarly appeared on white nationalist podcasts. A former Catholic substitute teacher and field hockey coach in Maryland, probably better expressed as a former substitute teacher at a Catholic school, and field hockey coach in Maryland, fired earlier this year after his school learned that he was also employed by the National Policy Institute, the white supremacist Richard Spencer's think tank. Richard Spencer, of course, back in the news, probably a story we won't get to today, but apparently invited for whatever reason to speak at the University of Michigan. Is that where they were doing it? And clashes between our Nazi cosplayers and anti-fascist forces there, once again, captured on a lot of mobile phone videos and shared around. I don't know how the whole thing went, but apparently lots of fights outside the venue and then a tiny crowd inside. He gave his speech and now it's done. Anyway, this teacher, apparently employed by the National Policy Institute and the website altright.com, like Volatich, he posted on social media under a pseudonym. Additionally, he was in charge of Spencer's security detail during the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017. How'd you like to find out that your kid's field hockey coach was in charge of Richard Spencer's security detail during Charlottesville? Volatich made clear on another podcast this year that her students know her political beliefs. I doubt that's the case. On an episode of the Conservative Resistance podcast, Resistance, how do you like that? She said her students often repeatedly asked her who she was going to vote for in the 2016 election. She said, we wouldn't tell the students, fearing retribution from administrators. But she said she told them, if you can figure out who I voted for, you can put the name in this basket on my desk and we'll see how many of you can figure it out. I will give your class a reward. That's a very timid white supremacist way of approaching things. She said all of her students guessed correctly by using logic and engaging with what she was teaching. Okay, or they knew you were an a-hole and they were able to tell you that. And in the clearest fashion allowable, under the school rules, they told you that they thought you were crazy and a jerk-ass. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of point that out, bring up that story, and remember for those of us listening here, just we'll sort of collectively take a moment to point out that, yeah, there's those three examples, and 3 in a year, it's not like an epidemic or anything, but you should consider the possibility that since she was teaching in Florida and the others were teaching where? Let's see. One was in Maryland and the other was in, where was the other person? I've lost the article already. I've clicked. There we are. Let's see. New Orleans. So I don't know what the law is in Louisiana with regard to armed teachers, but the point is that Florida was putting aside some $67 million to train teachers. And, I mean, if you're actually a committed white supremacist trying to live a double life and they offer up free gun training and maybe even a free gun as well that you can carry in the classroom, my guess is that, there's going to be, we were discussing, how many teachers would actually sign up for a program once the details finally came out and it said 130 plus hours of training. I don't know how lazy this particular white supremacist teacher is, but it sounds she's pretty industrious outside of school, busy with her podcast. I don't know if she can find the time for 130 hours of training, but I suppose if you were wondering what kind of teacher actually jumps at the chance for free training and carte blanche to carry a gun in school, my guess would be they'd be high on the list. On the other hand, school shooters so often tend to leave evidence behind, as the shooter in Parkland did, that they themselves are white supremacists. How about that? Wow, I didn't even really consider the possibility that the school shooter could potentially be known to other teachers as someone who dabbled in or was entirely committed to a white supremacist, racist, Nazi viewpoint. And what if the only armed teachers on hand are on the same side? What do they do? First of all, do they say, well, yes, but this is irresponsible behavior. I agree with them politically, but we should fight this out at the ballot box, not here in the hallways of the school. I must therefore do my duty and dispatch you with extreme prejudice and then fire at them? Or do they say, well, I have sympathies with this kid and I could try and talk him down from it and I won't fire, which isn't ordinarily a bad approach, except you don't want to necessarily save the life of a wacko white supremacist who's killing students at the moment. But I suppose, if you really wanted to make like an actual evil, oh my God, I can't believe it, kind of a political thriller out of it, suppose the teacher pulls the gun and uses the opportunity to shoot down students of color or kids she knew to be Jewish or otherwise on the S list of a white nationalist Nazi, and then tried to either pass it off as a mistake, which I guess is possible, or just join in the shooting in general and then kill herself at the end, or pin it on the shooter. Ballistics would eventually come back with a different story, probably, but, in the meantime, I suppose if you're a committed Nazi, you might relish the opportunity to get away with it for a while and eventually be perfectly happy to pay the price. I don't know. I'm just speculating. I think it's bad enough just to speculate on the possibility of arming Nazis with taxpayer funds and training them supposedly to shoot. Now, on the other hand, we've been saying that this training would largely be ineffectual, and I guess we should be happy for that to the extent that it's accidentally or purposefully arming Nazis. But I'd rather, I think, just lay the expense of arming the brown shirts on the brown shirts. Overall, I think that's probably the better approach, a free market approach. And I think they would agree too. They are, after all, right wing. So perhaps we can find some common ground there. What a nightmare that would be, though. What do you do with that situation? That's very unlikely to actually arise, as is the situation where a school shooter comes in and is actually confronted by an armed and trained teacher who takes direct action. But I guess eventually we're due for one of those as well. Lightning will eventually strike somewhere, and at the moment it does, of course, you have to be prepared for all of these people to claim that their program has been vindicated, and it will certainly look like that at the time. The difficulty with the more pragmatic long-term approach is you're right eventually, just as they probably think they will be right eventually, but will continue to be right, whereas they will have to wait for lightning to strike a second time in order for them to really, have solid proof of their thesis. And the statistics simply say that there'll be more accidents and unfortunate situations and there's just more opportunity to have them, and you'll see more of them before you ever see even the first heroic teacher actually step in and do what all of these people envision them being capable of doing. But, in the meantime, I guess everybody should be thinking about the dangers of arming white supremacists, and I suppose some of the people in favor of this program of arming teachers will actually only like it more when you bring that up. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That all too brief 1 minute break. Usually, probably live listeners actually appreciate it only being 1 minute. Doesn't give you a whole lot of time to do anything, though, but that's not what the breaks are designed for anyway. And never mind. If we get into that story, we'll waste too much time talking about that. Let's see. We did have the suggestion Pete was saying here. Pete, let me scroll back down and get his tweet back up here. Pete B2, wondering if Barb is a thing. That would be our boasting alt-right bro, and if not, it ought to be. So maybe we ought to copyright that one and see if we can't get people using that. I don't know how often we're going to have that come up, but it does seem like a thing, doesn't it? All right, let's see. Any other things that we can launch into here? Let's head over to Pocket and see what else I put aside, as well as a good source is scrolling back on my own Twitter feed. Not everything makes it into Pocket from there, but you can usually tell what's on my mind any morning on that. Let's see. This seems like something we need to put in the category of don't yet know exactly what this guy is up to, but we want to call his name out on this one. And this one, I think, came to my attention via our scout in the theoretical / conspiracy theory space, I guess I would say. And he's usually has a pretty good nose for sniffing things out, but we've I guess we've got this thing here. How can I even introduce this? It's solid reporting. It's from McClatchy's DC Bureau. And let me just give you the headline here. GOP fundraiser is everywhere on social media, secretive as a foreign agent. And I guess really I just want to get somebody's name on the record here. And let me see if I can also, at the same time, get our crediting for it correct. I don't know that I can pull up the tweet, but I'm pretty sure it came from Der Wouter, or Wouter Vanderhorst, who, like I said, is sort of my source for the leading bleeding edge, I would say, before spilling over into Louise Mensch territory. I don't mean to insult you there, Wooter, but you're leading edge, and I think just this side of the line, which is a good place to be, and very often, I would say, alert to apparent connections that to date haven't entirely played out as obviously valid, but I think I like to bookmark things and come back to them later in order to see what. Very often when I'm reading the story of somebody who said, I think we have mentioned his name before, very often it is because we have read stories that Wooter has forwarded our way. But there's a good amount of material out there that hasn't quite panned out just yet, so I wouldn't say you want to bark up every tree as loudly, but I would say sniff at the base and figure out whether there's some there. And if not, just park the names in your database and come back to them later. It's not unlikely that you'll find something later on. This a piece from just this morning, Kevin Hall from McClatchy. Who's the name we want to put on record? Have we mentioned the name before? It may be Yuri Vanitik, and that does sound somewhat familiar. Yuri Vanitik has already shepherded a wealthy Ukrainian lawmaker through the corridors of Congress to meet several GOP leaders last September. I got to get back in my habit of saying GOP, but it is sort of awkward. Anyway, to meet several GOP leaders last September, by the time he belatedly registered as a foreign agent with the Justice Department as required by law. Of course, we had that big wave of registrations when it became clear that you could get prosecuted for not registering. When he finally did submit information to comply with the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, he listed an anonymous shell company. Everyone loves the LLCs. An anonymous shell company in Wyoming as the official registrant, identifying himself as its vice president. 4 individuals and 1 limited liability company own Meadowwood Management, Meadowwood, not even Meadowwood Management, LLC, the documents say. But he didn't name any of those owners, and that could be a problem. The use of an opaque LLC for a lobbying registration is definitely unusual, and I'd be surprised if there isn't some follow-up from justice, said Joseph Sandler, a Washington, D.C. lawyer and FARA expert for the firm Sandler, Rife, Lamb, Rosenstein, and Birkenstock. FARA rules call for disclosure of the names of all partners, officers, and directors of the registrant. He just blew it off. Like students for Trump. Becoming something of a pattern. Well, I don't know, I registered, right? But you didn't register correctly. All right, well, we'll let the process work itself out on that one. Maybe eventually I'll notify you of who the other people are, or I'll close up shop and reopen under another name and go through the same process again. I imagine that's the game plan. If you are going to register under FARA, you've got to disclose all those things. Why would you want to have an anonymous LLC unless there's something in this you really want to hide? That's what you have to assume, said Blum, an expert on money laundering. Who is Blum? Another longtime Washington lawyer. I skipped this part. Jack Blum agreed that the document raises red flags. Violations of FARA passed, interestingly enough, in 1938 originally. Why? To curb propagandists working for the Nazis. Hello. Haven't been a high priority for federal prosecutors, but that may be changing, although since a lot of them will be Trump administration federal prosecutors, it might not be changing. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, though, who is investigating Russian influence in the 2016 election and possible Moscow ties to Donald Trump's campaign, charged former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort and his associate Rick Gates with breaking that law by not registering as required. Charges against Gates have been dropped, I guess, as part of his plea bargain. Now FARA new FARA registrations went up 50% in 2017 over a year earlier as Mueller brought the law higher visibility and awareness that violating it can bring penalties of up to 5 years in prison. The Meadowwood filing adds to a string of dubious actions and circumstances involving Vanitik, a Soviet emigre. A previous McClatchy report. Oh, see? Now let's see. Let me just open that one up and see if do we read this one? Previous McClatchy report being master of selfies with GOP or GOP Pauls. Soviet emigre has a confounding past. Once again, a piece by Kevin Hall about a month ago about Yuri Vanitik. So I'll pocket that one for now. A previous McClatchy report showed that the Republican Party fundraiser, who has brought in campaign money for Republican presidential nominees and other GOP politicians, has misrepresented his academic credentials, not a surprise, and that he's been named in a trail of civil lawsuits. Well, it says a trail of civil lawsuit, but I imagine that trail involves more than one, including one, anyway, that resulted in a $4.75 million judgment against him and his father. Several of his business associates have been jailed or sanctioned by regulators. Still, Vanitik has mingled closely with major leaguers in the Republican Party. In February of 2017, he was named National Finance Co-Chair for the New York Republican Party, with a party press release calling him an, quote, esteemed business leader, political strategist, and philanthropist, unquote. State party officials told McClatchy they did little vetting before bringing Vanitik, who posted photos of himself with state party chairman Ed Cox, aboard. Vanitik joined a congressional delegation in Berlin last April that included his close friend, Representative Dana Rohrabacher of California, who met there with Rinat Akhmetshin, who we've definitely mentioned before. The Soviet-born Akhmetshin, who has links to Russian intelligence agencies and is under scrutiny by Mueller, was present at the infamous June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, along with Donald Trump Jr., Manafort, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. How interesting. On that same trip, Vanitik posted photos of a dinner he attended along with Rohrabacher and Agrarian Party of Ukraine leader Vitaly Skotzik. 6 months later, Vanitik registered to lobby for the party. And many members of the Republican Party elite, everyone from the Bush family members to congressional leaders to former Vice President Dick Cheney, have posed for snapshots with Vanitik, who until recently posted the photos regularly on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Among the many shots Vanitik has shared was one from February of 2017 of him in a restaurant with Manafort, holding up a document and flashing a trademark thumbs up. By then, Manafort was under Mueller's microscope. Besides violating FARA, he was charged late last year with fraud and money laundering. It's unclear whether Vanitik and Manafort have done business together. Both have represented prominent Ukrainian clients. Meadowood and Vanitik's registrations name two clients, the Agrarian Party of Ukraine, and separately, Sergei Rybalka. Does that ring a bell for us? Rybalka. Part of the wealthy family that owns a big processed food chain and farm company called the S Group. Rybalka is a leader of the ultra-nationalist Radical Party. He faces accusations at home of violating the ban on trade with Russian-occupied Crimea, which he denies. Vanitik's filing said that he would arrange, quote, meetings with U.S. government officials to discuss U.S. foreign policy relating to Ukraine, international commerce, and related matters for Rybalka. Indeed, during several days of meetings last September, Vanitik appears to have set up meetings between Rybalka and House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California, who had to keep it secret, of course, because he was sworn to secrecy by Paul Ryan. Vanitik posted a photo of the two on September 14th. Vanitik is a tiny little guy. Rybalka also met with another Californian, GOP representative Ed Royce, the influential chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and with Rohrabacher. Let's see. Who else is in this picture here? This social media posting, which is embedded in the article here from fundraiser turned lobbyist Yuri Vanitik, shows him with fellow Californians, House Majority Leader Representative Kevin McCarthy and Representative Mimi Walters, both of whom have to duck down to sort of kind of get even in the frame of this picture. I don't know how tall Mimi Walters is, but she's actually bending her knees to squat down to get her head down near Vanitik's head level. And the photo certainly suggests, as the caption reads here, that they are chummy, the three of them. At least McCarthy and Vanatic are. And it's interesting because, I mean, McCarthy in that taped conversation was so concerned. He was the one that got freaked out about what Russians were doing, particularly in Ukraine. Meadowood contracted out some of its work to Potomac International Partners, a D.C. area lobbying firm, which wrote in its own FARA filing that it was hired to help raise, quote, the positive visibility of Sergei Rybalka among U.S. political, business, and thought leaders. A little bit more here in the piece. Behind the LLC curtain, limited liability companies are popular because they shield their owners from certain personal liabilities, as the term suggests. Generally, the owners' names aren't required to be publicly disclosed. Wyoming, in particular, requires minimal disclosure, even to state authorities. That makes some sense then of Wouter's original tweet, which I think I still have isolated here. Here we are, noting that Russians register their LLCs in the strangest places. Yuri Vanatic, of course, registered in Wyoming, but another article attached here noting that Maria Butina, you remember her, the Russian gun rights advocate / lobbyist / furniture boutique owner, had registered her LLC in South Dakota, almost as if they didn't know that the place to go for these things is Delaware, but I guess they're getting what they want out of Wyoming and maybe South Dakota. Let's take a look. Wyoming, as it says here, requires minimal disclosure, even to state authorities, but that lack of disclosure allows LLCs sometimes to be used for a wide array of nefarious purposes. I can't believe it. Including tax evasion and money laundering. Not that again. Because they can hide their true ownership. Vanatic and his lawyers have not responded to requests for comment over a period of almost a month. Justice Department spokespersons declined to discuss Meadowood or registration by LLCs more generally. And a Scribd file of the FARA registration for Meadowood Management LLC is embedded herein. Principal business address is given as Los Angeles, California, which accounts for his being a fellow Californian of Mimi, Walters, and Kevin McCarthy, I guess. But for some reason, registered in Wyoming nonetheless. Okay. And this is interesting. Oh, look at this. So this is the U.S. Department of Justice FARA registration statement. The name of the registrant, Meadowood Management. The principal business address of Meadowood Management, Century Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. And it goes on then to say, let's see, if the registrant is an individual, furnish the following information: residence, other businesses and addresses, if any, nationality, year of birth, all of that. But because they're registering an LLC, that is all left blank. If the registrant is not an individual, furnish the following information. What is the type of organization? Other, specify a limited liability company. Date and place of organization, December 17th, 2014, Wyoming. Principal address or address of principal office, 109 East 17th Street, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Name of the person in charge, Oksana Chernivals. Look at this. And obviously, I guess, a Ukrainian name. Oksana, with an A rather than the O, Oksana transliteration. Let's see, I'm going to try and work that. It's a very small type as well. Chernavskala. Oksana Chernavskala. Okay. Wow, we managed to get that one in. Location of branch or local offices, Dove Street in Newport Beach, California. It's almost as if they really have no presence in Wyoming whatsoever. Who would have suspected it? Let's see. Listing of all the partners performing the functions of an officer. One would be Oksana from out of Newport Beach, the managing member. The vice president, Yuri Vanatic, operating out of Santa Ana, California. Both list USA for their nationalities, though I suppose that's a development that came to fruition later in life. Let's see, other foreign principals for whom the registrant is acting or has agreed to act would be Sergei Rybalka and the Agrarian Party of Ukraine as well. Okay, very interesting. Any other revelations from the document? I don't think so. The article continues. In an effort to learn whether Meadowood's registration was out of the ordinary, McClatchy searched the Justice Department's foreign agent database and turned up an estimated 300 unique LLCs, some of which are inactive. Most are located in and around Washington, D.C., and use the name of known entities such as a law firm like Arent Fox, public relations giant Burson Marsteller, and former Missouri Democratic Representative Dick Gephardt. Interesting. Meadowood was the only one McClatchy found that had camouflaged its ownership. Meadowood is also one of just 2 LLCs in the FARA database that's registered in Wyoming. The other belongs to a lobbyist with a home address in the Cowboy State. But the address given on Meadowood's FARA filing is in Los Angeles, at the same location Vanatic gives as his own business address. In both cases, a lawyer, John Hamilton, is the designated recipient for any communications. And that's what you have to do when you register in one of those states if you don't actually do any business there. Hamilton, who didn't respond to numerous phone calls and messages, also represents Vanatic in ongoing civil litigation. He also represented Oksana, and here it's in better type here. Let's see, what do we got here? Chernyavskaya, Oksana Chernyavskaya, Meadowood's principal, according to its FARA filing, in a now settled 2014 lawsuit against a hotel after $75,000 worth of jewelry and belongings disappeared. Chernyavskaya's surname is spelled several different ways on different documents. It is noted herein. So back in 2014, she was running around with $75,000 worth of jewelry and other belongings that were stolen out of a hotel room. Interesting. And Hamilton was their lawyer. I wonder about that. On his personal FARA registration, filed in addition to the Meadowood document, Vanatic lists a home address in Santa Ana, California. But a neighbor who knows the family said Vanatic does not live there. Only his parents do. His father, Anatoly, is a convicted felon, you might be interested to know, and father and son have for years been co-defendants in civil lawsuits alleging fraud. I'm born and raised here, lived here nearly 50 years in the United States, all of them, as an American citizen. And, man, I don't know that I've been named in a civil lawsuit ever. I mean, knock on wood, that could happen to anybody. But to have a trail of lawsuits behind you, it's just very interesting that in the period of time, clearly not their entire lives that they've spent here, they are suing hotels for losing track of $75,000 worth of jewelry. I have also, in all of my nearly 50 years, never owned $75,000 worth of jewelry, but your mileage may vary. Not to mention being named father and son together for years, co-defendants in civil lawsuits alleging fraud. Chernyavskaya is also tough to track down. The phone number associated with the Newport Beach address listed for her belongs to someone else. She appears in some of Vanatic's frequent social media postings and is an active poster herself, maybe, unless she's a bot. But there is little that points to political activity or overseas ties. Meadowood's creation predated by almost 3 years the lobbying activity it later reported. Yet, because of its anonymity, it is impossible to know what other purpose, if any, Meadowood served. And also embedded in the piece here, a Scribd file of the Wyoming filing. The company's Wyoming incorporation documents originally date back to December 10th, 2014, when Meadowood's principal office was in Suite 609 at an address in the Southern California city of Orange. The suite, of course, actually a mailbox in a UPS store. A 2016 McClatchy investigation involving the Panama Papers. That massive leak of documents about secretive offshore companies showed how Wyoming and Nevada's minimal disclosure requirements enabled Russians and Brazilians to camouflage assets around the globe. I think I would like to incorporate in Wyoming. Simple reference to the staff officer of the Red October who wanted to live in Montana, which is, of course, a different place. But interesting that people trade notes when hiding assets around the globe. Wyoming, a good place to incorporate. Nevada, not a bad place either. Meadowood could be forced to disclose its true owners only if ordered to do so under a subpoena from federal law enforcement. Oh, I'm sorry, any law enforcement. I added federal because I'm thinking Mueller, but which, at least initially, would have gone to Box 609 at UPS store number 2075. That is usually a red flag for all kinds of things. If you try to open a bank account registered to a mailbox address, or you try to open a broker account, they are going to bump it back and say, we want something real, said Blum. But not Wyoming. Less than a month after its December 2014 incorporation, Meadowood changed agents and address. In fact, it has changed agents and or moved offices 7 times in just over 3 years, according to Wyoming records. Another pretty serious red flag. I haven't moved 7 times, even personally, I don't think. And that, I guess maybe including going back and forth to college and moving to different dorm rooms. I guess you could say I had 7. Vanitik's opaque and tardy Meadowood FARA filing follows by more than a year his apparent work for another foreign client that he didn't report. Social media postings show that he led around Washington a politician and famous opera singer from the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, Pata, oh my goodness, more names I got to do. This one, Georgian. Berchuladze, I'm going to guess. It's Pata Berchuladze. In 2016, was trying, unsuccessfully in the end, to unseat the ruling Dream Party with his newly formed State for the People Party. I guess opera singer turned politician. Is that what we're looking at? Vanitik, true to form, posted photos showing the two men together. Oh, I'm sorry, I guess they are separate individuals. In a private jet flying from Cleveland on September 8th, 2016. Later that same day, the Georgian appears in separate online postings with Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina and Rohrabacher. A photo from a day earlier showed him with Florida GOP Senator, you'll never guess, Marco Rubio. Berchuladze was also in the United States a few months earlier, in July, meeting with New Jersey Democratic Senator Robert Menendez. So we're all in on this one. The ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, among others, spokespersons for Burr, Rubio, and Menendez did not respond to emails from McClatchy. Berchuladze had no immediate comment when McClatchy attempted to contact him and is believed to be performing in Moscow while under investigation at home for alleged embezzlement, a probe he labels political. He did not respond to a request for comment, but Vanitik would have been required to register under FARA whether or not he was paid to introduce Berchuladze to members of Congress. Even if you're pro bono, under the FARA, you have to register, said Sandler. Until recently, many might have disregarded FARA's requirements and not been penalized. A critical report from Justice's Inspector General in September of 2016 noted weak enforcement of FARA and that the agency had brought just 7 criminal FARA cases between 1966 and 2015. It also said 62% of FARA filings came late, as was the case with Vanitik. A bipartisan group of senators last Thursday introduced legislation to create a new FARA enforcement unit within the Justice Department. Since the December 2017 charges brought against Manafort, more than 36 firms have registered, nearly 10% increase in the number of active firms registered under the law. Mueller cited the FARA rules again on February 16th when indictments were announced against 13 Russians and 3 Russian companies for alleged meddling in the elections. The charging documents noted the Russians' failure to register. So very interesting. And I think clearly a name to watch, and he's such a collector of photos with politicians, I guess, of both parties, so only one Democrat so far named in all of this. Well worth keeping an eye on, though we may be a little far out on the curve for Vanitik, and he may or may not ever connect back to Trump Russia, but I would suspect that he is heavily involved. You know where I think he fits in all the puzzle? We'll plug him into a puzzle, and we'll puzzle this one out over the next couple of weeks. I think he figures in most prominently, obviously, with members of Congress, and it could be his activity on behalf of his Ukrainian and Russian-connected clients that scares Republicans into protecting or trying to deflect the Robert Mueller investigation of the Trump campaign and administration. There are probably connections there among people and certainly among interests that connect them in the probe and implicate them in all of this. McCarthy chief among them, I guess we should say. We'll try and wrap this up and finish our last segment after this break. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Where to go with the rest of the show? Well, I am implored by Jack Ox 48, in case you're interested in following on Twitter, as you ought to be. We all ought to support one another on Twitter. Why not? And he says, today's real interest should be in Jane Mayer's dossier article rather than the Nunberg breakdown. I think we probably gave about the right amount of time to the Nunberg breakdown, but not enough time, I'm sure, to Jane Mayer. But I don't know if we're going to ever have enough time. I mean, we really are going to have to set aside a show and a half to do that. Luckily, others of you, perhaps among our listening audience, but certainly among our reading audience over at Daily Coast, have done the same. And Jack points me to the diary by, I'm going to guess, Annie Lee. And I always, in looking at people's names, when they're all in lowercase letters and no spaces are used, I am often inclined to try to pronounce it all as one word. And I think in my mind, I've always thought of Annie Lee as like Annielli or something like that. And if you look closely, Annie, Annie Lee, that makes much more sense. Annie Lee as a first name, last name combination than Annielli, but you never know. That could also be, I suppose, somebody's last name, although I would expect 2 L's if it were for instance, a Italian surname. But anyway, rather than get into that, why don't we take a look at what I think Annie is saying here. This is the article, the link that Jack provided in saying, hey, you ought to be paying attention to Jane Mayer. And then we'll perhaps turn to Jane, but I think this is a good digest of the top takeaways. Today's real interest should be in Jane Mayer's dossier article rather than the Nunberg breakdown. Annie posted yesterday, and she puts it this way. If you're not distracted by Sam Nunberg's very public meltdown, which now seems orchestrated by Roger Stone, since right-wing nutjob media has ignored it, and if you've read the mind-numbing Glenn Simpson testimony to Congress transcripts, plus the Michael Wolff book, it's a lot of reading, you will find that Jane Mayer's New Yorker story has more clarifying amusements, even if they are confirmations of how tangled Trump-Russia has become. Remember that Jane Mayer is private enemy number 1 for demonstrating how dangerous the Kochs are to democracy by their trying quite openly to unethically smear her and get her fired. But it also weaves a compelling story of how election 2016 was the perfect storm, where collusion runs a definable gamut from outright conspiracy to tacit cooperation. Some bullet points illustrating that. Trump campaign hijinks ranging from Agent Orange's actual public remarks before and after the election to inaction in implementing actual congressional efforts like sanctions, and actual interactions with Russians, however implicitly treasonous, and the fuzzy logic of data targeting 2016 election districts as normal domestic political communication by a political party, paired with media meddling by foreign agents intent on disrupting an election, and the commitment of the GOP as a party to ensuring that Russian actions pre- and post-election were well supported, particularly in terms of defending the cover-up and obstruction, and the laundered and unlaundered money trail. We will discover that the 2016 election was unfortunately a case that Trump will out, where a truth value may range between completely true and completely false. Getting a little hairy here, but I'm trying to untangle this as I read. If the Trump-Russia arc still seems confusing, Meyer's story shows how there were many channels of activity which may or may not have known of their mutual interest in stealing the election and or putting Lord Dampnut in power. Little lingo laden there, but I think we can try and clarify things. And here we enter into the section quoted, I believe, from the Meyer article that'll give us the nuggets that Annie thought important and that Jack thought important before diving into the bigger text, which I'm sure will continue throughout the week. Orbis often performs anti-corruption investigations for clients attempting internal reviews and helps hedge funds and other financial companies perform due diligence or obtain strategic information. One Orbis client, and we'll have to read the article to figure out more about Orbis, who agreed to talk to me, that being Jane Meyer, a Western businessman with interests in Russia and Ukraine, described Steele to me as very efficient, very professional, and very credible. He said that his company had successfully cross-checked Steele's research with other people, adding, "I don't know anyone who's been critical of his work. His reports are very good. It's an absolute no-brainer that he's just a political target. They're trying to shoot the messenger." Republican claims to the contrary. Steele's interest in Trump did not spring from his work for the Clinton campaign. He ran across Trump's name almost as soon as he went into private business, many years before the 2016 election. Two of his earliest cases at Orbis involved investigating international crime rings whose leaders, coincidentally, were based in New York's Trump Tower. Very interesting, and I guess therefore deserving of the bolding that Annie has given it. Let's see, more about Steele's background. Steele and Simpson had previously worked together and shared a mutual fascination with Russian oligarchs and international organized crime. They had symbiotic approaches. Fusion focused on open source research, mind-numbing dives into the fine print of public records. Steele's specialty was gathering intelligence from informed sources, many of them Russian. At virtually the same time that Steele told the FBI about Russia's interference in the 2016 campaign, the Kremlin was engaged, without his knowledge, in at least two other schemes to pass compromising information about Hillary Clinton to Trump's inner circle. Here, a couple of bullet points. The first being about George Papadopoulos and that channel. The second being the Trump Tower meeting on June 9th. Interesting. As I'm skimming here, I'm not certain that I think Annie has sort of jumped straight into the middle of things here, which for people who haven't read the Jane Meyer article might be less than illuminating. And perhaps where we really ought to be spending our time then is combing through that piece instead. Although I know that that is likely, as I said, to really probably tangle us up for considerably longer than we'll really be able to deal with today. But just by way of starting the ball rolling here, this is, of course, the Jane Meyer piece being Christopher Steele, the man behind the Trump dossier, how the ex-spy tried to warn the world about Trump's ties to Russia. And just at a glance, you can see that this thing is far too lengthy and probably dense a piece for us to get through in even a full day, a full 2 hours in all of this. And, well, it seems to me that the initial aim, I guess the flag I'll put up, and the reason I'll include this in the roundup for your own reading, is that the title implies that this is a piece establishing, I guess, the bona fides of Steele as an intelligence analyst and an intelligence source all by himself to help you better understand why it is that the Mueller investigation, even if it didn't originate with Steele's reporting and intelligence gathering, why it considers it to be at least informative and interesting part of the investigation. But I'd like to comb over the piece, and perhaps I should do it off the air and bring you what I think are my takeaways, or at least collect other people's takeaways, because, like I said, the real social sharing that I've found to have been taking place of Meyer's article seems to be nuggets which people think are buried gems that are more important than the main focus of the article, according to the headline, which is, establishing Steele as a reliable actor in all this. People are more, I guess people who have already assumed or accepted the idea that Steele is a reliable actor in all this. We're more interested in the bits and pieces of the story of how he came to work for Fusion, how he came to be in this line of work, and what he discovered along the way. And I see more people sharing that, I think, than the piece as establishing Steele as a useful and reliable source. I'm going to move then to a couple of other smaller stories and fill the time that way, things I also would like to put on your radar. And perhaps we'll digest Jane's story off the air and come back with it, around Thursday, Friday. As I'm looking forward, by the way, to having Greg and Joan back with us on Wednesday, 2 solo days in a row, back to back. To start this week, after the craziness of any given weekend, is a tall order. All right, let's see. Small scale story, but a good example of the kinds of grift that Donald Trump and family still don't seem to understand, or seem unwilling to understand, even if it's obvious to them, are problematic. Here's the one. Trump Organization orders T markers featuring presidential seal. Jacqueline Thompson on this admittedly small scale story. For The Hill, the Trump Organization has ordered T markers that feature the presidential seal, which could violate a federal law dictating that the seal can only be used for government business pro publica, reported on Monday, and we should probably be reading their article instead. It's just that The Hill attracts my attention all the time with their photo illustrated tweets. This interesting. Catherine Sullivan for ProPublica, writing under a generalized umbrella of Trump Incorporated. Here it says Trump Incorporated, the headline. Podcast Extra, the Trump Organization ordered golf course markers with the presidential seal. That may be illegal. The president's company has ordered a set of presidential seal replicas for its golf course tee markers, raising more ethics questions. By the way, the Hill article explains, in case you are not a golfer or you are a golfer and you still don't understand what we're talking about, tee markers. They mark the tee boxes, the different tee boxes of different lengths. If you're a golfer, you know what we're talking about. But each golf hole, basically, usually on a high-end golf course, or even the trashy crap that Donald Trump offers 3 or 4 different tee boxes that make the hole a different length. That is, the hole is the hole. It is where it is. But you can tee off very often. They'll have, some places will even have up to 5 different tee boxes. But they have, generally speaking, one up front sometimes for senior players, more elderly senior players. Very often, people remember that the PGA will identify you as a senior player. You're eligible at age 50 for the senior tour anyway. But senior players, women's tees, ladies' tees are very often up to the front and shortening the hole for them. Then there's usually like a set of, generically speaking, they're usually marked with different colors as well. White tees, the red tees for ladies, white tees for men players, but like high handicap players, generally speaking. The blue tees, usually a little further back for lower handicapped men. Then they occasionally you'll put a black set of tees for like what they call pro tees. And if they were hosting a pro golf tournament, they would be teeing off from back there or even further back. Sometimes they just create a separate set of tees. The senior tees are sometimes gold marked, right? So you got all of these things. Anyway, sometimes they'll be thematic for the golf course itself. Here, one of the Trump golf courses, and it doesn't say which one, it simply says Trump International Golf Course. That suggests probably one of the ones down in Florida. But the one up here in Virginia being Trump National. And so what they're doing is they had contracted with sign and metalworking company Eagle Sign and Design. ProPublica found out that they had gotten an order to create dozens of tee markers featuring the presidential seal to be used on Trump golf courses. They may be putting them in at all of them. Essentially, of course, what he's trying to do is trade on the presidency. And I don't know that it's even Trump himself doing it, though he may have suggested that to his kids. Technically, the kids would be the ones handling this because it's one of the businesses trying to trade on the presidency. You're playing on the president's personal golf courses. You can tell by the fact that the tee markers at the tee boxes feature the presidential seal. Well, like we said, that is problematic. And the company declined to tell ProPublica, according to the Hill's report on this, who had ordered the markers. However, the publication and WNYC viewed an order form that listed the company or the customer as Trump International. We made the design and the client confirmed the design, Eagle Sign owner Joseph E. Bates told ProPublica. Several of Trump's golf courses feature the name Trump International, including the West Palm Beach, Florida course that the president frequents while he's at Mar-a-Lago. Some Trump courses have featured markers with the Trump family crest, which is itself a fake, but whatever. Federal law, here's where the problem arises, states that the presidential seal can only be used for government business. Use of the seal otherwise can lead to criminal charges and is punishable by up to 6 months in prison. Don't get your hopes up for that. And of course, here comes the pushback. Past presidents, including former President Barack Obama, have used golf balls featuring the presidential seal while golfing in office. The Trump Organization, of course, being run by Trump's sons, Eric and Donald Trump Jr., while their father is in office. Nobody's going to send them to jail for that, since A, they haven't used them, and B, even the connection to, business returns would be somewhat tenuous. But yeah, the pushback will be Obama has the presidential seal on golf balls. Is that problematic? Well, it's not official business. Yes, that's true. Of course, he wasn't selling the golf balls. But then again, neither was the Trump Organization set to sell the tee markers, so far as I know, although they may very well have been offering them or eventually have been offering them for sale in the pro shops as souvenirs. And I have very little doubt that they'll try and sneak some presidential seal stuff in there, and everybody, enterprising reporters should go ahead and check it out. But yeah, it's a totally different thing to be using the presidential seal as a marker and reminding everybody literally at every hole that this is the president's personal golf course. When in fact it's not supposed to be. That's why he separated himself from the business. These are golf clubs that belong to and are run by Eric and Don Jr., neither of whom currently are president of the United States. And of course, although, again, Obama had those golf balls, but again, he wasn't selling them or trying to tell anybody. It wasn't, for instance, ever supposed to give the impression that golf, this is the president's game, and if you play it, we will give you special favors. That was never the intention, as far as I know. And though he may have given them out as souvenirs to people, if you were lucky enough to be invited to play a round of golf with the president. Then there are, of course, the presidential seal boxes of M&Ms that they give out on Air Force One. Is that a problem? I don't know. But basically what we're looking at here is they're trying to decorate up Trump properties as somehow being officially presidential, which is supposed to raise their cachet, and I suppose probably also the registration fees and the Daily Greens fees as well, I'm sure. All right, let's see. Who sent me this one? One of our UK correspondents, although now I'm not certain which it was. Yes, Matthew Rigdon, of course, making the quite correct comment that when it comes to the Hill, I'm like Trump and the PDB. That is absolutely right. On Twitter, photos are everything. It's really true. And now I see this. ABC News Politics also picking up the ProPublica story about those presidential seals. So everybody's in on the act. Yeah, catching my eye, especially during the show, photographs do the trick. And I am sorry that we don't incorporate photos as obviously and as frequently into our publicity tweets for Daily Kos. And I don't know why that is the case. I mean, if you look at the tweets, if you open up the tweets on TweetDeck, you'll see usually the photo illustrating the piece. But somehow the ones on the Hill come through in the initial tweet. And I don't know whether it has to do with the length of it or what. I got to figure out how they're programming their thing, because it works like a charm for me. Let's see. Who made this suggestion and where? I have to scroll back in my KITM timeline to be sure who suggested this, although it seems to be taking longer than I want to, and I should just go ahead and get to the story instead. But the idea was to point out for everybody the story that was in wide circulation yesterday. Former Russian spy critically ill in the UK after exposure to some unknown substance. Sergei Skripal, 66 years old, and a woman in her 30s, found unconscious on a bench in a Salisbury shopping center. One of the two people critically ill in a Salisbury hospital after suspected exposure to an unknown substance is a Russian man who was exchanged in a high-profile spy swap in 2010. The Guardian understands. Sergei Skripal, 66, was one of 4 Russians exchanged for 10 deep-cover sleeper agents planted by Moscow in the U.S. By the way, that raises another interesting specter here. Wiltshire police said that a man in his 60s and a woman in her 30s were found unconscious on a bench in the Maltings shopping center in Salisbury on Sunday afternoon. Temporary Assistant Chief Constable Craig Holden said that the pair were believed to have been known to each other and were in critical condition. He added, "This has not been declared as a counterterrorism incident, and we would urge people not to speculate. However, I must emphasize that we will retain an open mind and will continue to review this position." This scared the crap out of a lot of people, not least because, of course, everyone remembers the story of Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned with polonium by, it is suspected that he was poisoned with polonium, I guess, by agents of the Kremlin. But I know that this scared at least a few other Russian folks with stories to tell, including... Man, how can I weave all the stories together quickly enough? The Belarusian escort who was, I don't know whether we really discussed the story or not, but she recently came to my attention while I was looking at one of the YouTube videos from the Russian opposition leader, what's his name? Navalny? Is that right? His latest widely circulated video placed this particular woman, this escort, with Oleg Deripaska, as I recall, on his yacht. And I think we mentioned the story because there was some connection to a very high-ranking current actual Russian government official as well. And this woman... apparently just recently arrested in Thailand and now being referred to as a sex coach, very interestingly enough. And I mean, under related professions, I would guess. But apparently they were putting on some sort of sex coaching, was what the terminology they were using, seminar in Thailand, which has a very vibrant sex tourism trade. But they weren't willing to put up with this. I guess they were unlicensed sex coaches. And they were arrested, and she's being detained and doesn't want to go back to Russia and is apparently offering to tell some stories that would connect Oleg Deripaska and possibly Putin himself directly to the Trump-Russia 2016 election question. And she says she'll tell that story if she's offered asylum by the United States, which is kind of fishy, and I don't know whether that's really going to yield anything or not. But it doesn't surprise me that she might be afraid to go back to Russia. And then this apparent poisoning of this former spy, I guess, in the UK has got her freaked out. She's afraid, apparently, that the same thing could happen, and it very easily could, to her, were she to return to Russia. Now, interestingly, it doesn't really note this here, but up at the top of the story, I mentioned that this man, Sergei Skripal, was exchanged in a high-profile spy swap in 2010. One of 4 Russians exchanged for 10 deep-cover sleeper agents planted by Moscow in the U.S. Now, in 2010, 10 deep-cover sleeper agents planted by Moscow in the U.S. were, in fact, charged with espionage and eventually deported from the United States, sent back to Russia. And one of them, you may recall, was Anna Chapman, whose name recently re-entered my radar for no particular reason. But Anna Chapman, I've never really been able to connect to Trump Russia, this despite the fact that she was or is now anyway, is a model, and I think she might have been a model at the time. She was a very attractive, young Russian woman who married a British guy where she came by the surname Chapman, later divorcing him and then moving to the United States and undertaking to establish an online real estate business called Property Finder LLC, by the way, and moving in circles that put her in contact. Well, she was working in Manhattan, downtown Manhattan, and basically putting herself in a probably high-end-ish, but not ultra-luxury, not necessarily Trump-level prices, but selling properties internationally, both in New York and abroad, online, and working in a luxury real estate space in Manhattan in 2009, 2010 as a very attractive model slash real estate agent who also happened to be Russian and was very English adept, to borrow the gun adept phrasing. And I was surprised that she hadn't turned up any connection to Donald Trump so far. She, in fact, moved in slightly different circles and ended up hooking up with another billionaire dude who was considerably older than her, but New Jersey-based, but also real estate. I just thought it was amazing that Donald Trump had somehow managed to not have this come up. But she was a very hot property back in 2010. That is to say, there was a lot of newspaper reporting on her because she was very striking looking, and the possibility for a story of the sort of like sexy Russian spy discovered here in the United States and uncovered as a sleeper agent and sent back to Russia. She was the only one that got any coverage because, of course, she was the most attractive, and there looked like you could make a story out of this. By the way, the other 10 sleeper agents, deep cover sleeper agents, I don't know who came up with that term. That was supposedly the plan for them to be deep cover. It was really very much like people are now pointing out is it a Netflix story? Is it an Amazon story? I don't know whose online channel is sponsoring. The Americans. And the storyline is pretty much the same. Pairs, couples that were planted in the United States under supposedly deep cover, supposed to pose as American citizens, all, born and raised as American citizens, but really be Russian sleeper agents. But they did a terrible job. Among the people that they actually chose, there are people, one, who didn't change their names and still went as Russified names, and two, had very thick Russian accents, who were walking around as so-called sleeper agents. I don't know how seriously we should take these people. Walking around as sleeper agents saying, of course, I am American. I am born in Detroit. And you know what? I don't think that you were. and you're a terrible sleeper agent. So no surprise that they were caught. But interesting that they're coming up again, and I guess the people for whom we exchanged them are now being poisoned, or at least one of them allegedly being poisoned over in the UK. So, I don't know. I brought it up. Alarm bells ring, I guess, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about Anna Chapman. And I would not be surprised if somehow, somewhere along the line, they were able to connect her to Trump. She must have tried to visit him at some point, clearly. But you never know. Maybe she was focusing elsewhere, really focusing hard on her deep cover. She was the most successful of the bunch. We will try and return to this and try and wrap up all sorts of loose ends, plus the Jane Meyer loose ends, on the show later this week. Reminder, tomorrow, Wednesday, Joan McCarter Day, plus the triumphant return of Greg to our airwaves.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's what we got coming up on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, starting off in their Bistro Cafe. The already screwed this up. ACLU working to reunite an asylum seeker with her 7-year-old child who was separated from her by immigration officials. Typical story, to be sure. We'll catch up on that and so much more. Do stay tuned.